Hi everyone, my name is Tine Sorensen. I work with Acquia, and I'm here to talk to you guys about performance. And there's a few details about me there. I'm originally Danish. I've been in Brisbane for 3-4 years, and I've worked with IT since '99. That was back when we sold email addresses and such. So that's a little bit of a dinosaur. I just wanted to hear how many of you guys work with Drupal, like on a day-to-day basis? Almost everyone, that's awesome. And how many have built a site? Nearly everyone. How many consider themselves developers? Okay, cool, pretty cool. Fine, I just wanted to have a feeling of, when I'm gonna bore the heck out of everyone and what is interesting and what's not. Okay, so I've been working with Acquia for the last year and a half, I think, and the last year or so I've gotten really interested in performance and done everything I could get my hands on with it, because I think it's awesome. It's super fun. It's like Lego for adults. So yeah. But before then, I was like most other people. When I had a performance issue with a site I was building, then I kind of Googled Drupal Performance and on the internet and came up with a list of something. And then I started from the top and just applied everything until I found something that maybe worked. So, and I think that's something that we don't talk enough about, is what do we do when a site is already screwed, when you have a site that's just not responding, or your server is falling over, or it's taking, like, you can cook dinner before the page is loaded. A lot of people talk about server setup and about Varnish and how to write configs and set up memcache and all that stuff. I'm not going to talk about that. Other people are way better at that than I am. So what I find really interesting is what to do when the trouble has already happened. So, and performance, it sounds like it's really, really geeky, but it's not necessarily. My point is usually that anyone that's ever had a site where just one page loaded slowly and they couldn't figure out what to do, they should be able to get something from this. I think it's sometimes we don't talk about it enough because it's a little bit of a fun project to present, because there's so many areas where the problem can be, and it's really hard to walk through all those possibilities. But there's also a lot of things that are very, very general and that are often the issue, and that's really low-hanging fruit and easy to spot. So my hope is that if there's anyone here who are like me before I started working with this, and who don't know what to do when they sit there with a server that's burning or a page that's loading slowly, at least has a few tools to go home with. Front-end performance is not something I do a lot either. I'm lousy at it. I'm really lousy at front-end. I can't even write JavaScript. So I don't debug that a lot. I do know that there's something about where you need to put your JavaScript event so that the page loads, so that the user can interact with it, but that's about how far I go. I'm not a great sysadmin either, so I think most of my sysadmin skills dates back to 2002, and something has happened since. So, but I know the general concepts and enough to help myself, and enough to read logs and figure out what's happening. So, Drupal is evolving and it's happening fast, just as the rest of the internet and technology in general. We're talking a lot about being enterprise ready. There are huge sites that are built as a framework. We're using Drupal to build sites that are software as a service, like an online LMS or an application. So it adds a lot to complexity, and we can't know everything. So often when I work with performance at Acquia as a technical architect, then we work with developer teams, and sometimes, a customer can be a bit like, oh, but we already paid the developers, and now you come and find all these things that should be changed. And that's just two very different areas. Just if you think about all the technical stuff that's happening when we build a website, then there's like operations, there's DevOps, there's developers, themers, designers, and that's just in the more building kind of area of it. And I do think performance is also its whole own area. So when magic happens is often when I get to work with a developer team where we just get to work together, because the developers go in there with the focus of building an awesome site with focus on, functionality, making it pretty, all this stuff. And I get the luxury of just going in there and see, okay, but how long does that take to load? So yeah. And that's what I often tell customers if they start about, oh, but the developers should see that. It's like, we rarely get a site where we can't find anything. There's always something to be found. If it was me developing a site today, I would probably miss half of it. I actually just did on a project I just delivered and fixed my own performance error last night and took 6 seconds off the load time. So, well, anyways. But when we solve performance issues, then something that I rarely see is that people are actually basing their approach on data. And that's something that is really, really important if you want to know what's going on. Often when I talk to people and they have a site that's, they've got a page that's loading in like 2.5 minutes, then they are sure that, oh, it's that RSS feed that was really bulky that we had developed over there. I'm sure that's it. And then, they have developers that start putting a lot of work into that. Or it could be, oh, it's probably caching. Caching is always good, so we need to rewrite the entire caching layer. And that might be it, but it's a bit like winning the lottery if you're not basing it off some sort of investigation where you get some facts and figure out what's actually happening here. So what I always start with doing is, of course, I get some information about the site and what are the symptoms, what kind of site is it, and then I go in and collect all that I can find of data that I think could be related to this. Then I analyze it using my Drupal knowledge, and that's something I could do before I worked at Acquia. Probably a bit better now, but you don't need to be the mastermind of performance and sysops in order to have some Drupal experience that gives you a common sense of what's right and what's wrong. When you look at something and you can see that it's the blocks that are taking up 99% of the time, then it's probably something that's wrong with the blocks somewhere, or that's a good place to start. So why I think that it's so important with the data is that I think we are often fumbling around in the blind and spending a lot of time in places where it doesn't necessarily have an effect, because it's hard to figure out how to find out exactly what is happening. But performance for me, it's like you can, to make the perfect site and get everything top-tuned and performing, everybody knows that. That's like a never-ending project. You can keep on making stuff prettier and removing an extra if in or case in the switch or something like that. But that just takes time, and you're not necessarily hitting what's going to actually make a difference for you. So I usually collect data, I analyze, look at it, and use my common sense. And then, based on that, I usually prioritize a combination of low-hanging fruit, like what is going to give me a really nice payoff really quickly with not a lot of time, and then the areas that I choose that take more time, and that would usually be the ones that still give payoff or I just can't ignore, even though it might take me a week or a month to fix. Something that I've often found, though, is that the easy solutions can be a really, really hard sell, surprisingly. I do remember it a little bit from when I was a developer myself, that all that stuff with configuring stuff in the admin interface and putting a click here, that certainly couldn't be very important, because, that's just configuration. But as developers, sometimes I think we end up being penny wise but dollar stupid. We are so happy with complexity and with custom code and making everything pretty that it can be a surprisingly hard sell sometimes to sell the things that is under an hour effort or 5 minutes and can make the website go twice as fast, because nobody believes it's that important until their site is crashed. So this is an example of that. That was really, really low-hanging fruit. This is New Relic, which is my favorite tool in the world. One of the reasons is it actually looks a little bit like Tetris or Lego, just fluid, I think. No, it's really pretty graphs. Who in here knows New Relic already? Okay, half of you do. I love that tool.
What you're saying, sorry?
New Relic.
New Relic.
Yeah.
New Relic.
So This was one of those where there was a really low-hanging fruit. I went into New Relic. I had a customer that had pages that were loading in, here we have 5 seconds, and that's just the application processing time. That's a graph from New Relic. And on top of that, there were like 15 seconds of front-end processing. So it was 20 seconds from you clicked the URL until you had it in your browser. And using New Relic, I could see that here that it was actually the blocks. The blocks were taking up almost all the processing time. I'm going to show you a screenshot of how you can see that in New Relic in a minute. And what we found out was that all the blocks were actually enabled. None of them were disabled, and they were all being loaded and processed in the background. And they had some really heavy views in many of the blocks that had no caching on them whatsoever. And then in their theming layer, they had custom template files, where they went in and chose exactly which blocks they wanted to display and loaded them again and rendered them in the theming layer. So they actually did all the work in the theming layer as if nothing was happening in the background, but it was. There was like 35 blocks loading in the background. So that's why they had an application processing time of 5 seconds. That should preferably be around 1.5 seconds max. I could see that in New Relic. It would have been probably pretty hard finding out that all the blocks were loading in the background just by clicking around in the admin interface in Drupal. But New Relic showed me that, and then we went in and we put the blocks in context, so they were switched back and forth, so that it was only the ones that were actually used on each page that were loaded, and that helped immensely. The overall page load time went from 5 seconds to 1/2 second on application processing time, and that was like, I think, maybe 2 hours of work. So that's a really neat save of a website. It's not that complicated often. This is how it looked when it went live. So I really like that. It's pretty graphs. I love New Relic. So, but yeah, and it was good also just to show everybody that it mattered what we were doing, to actually look at the facts and not just guess and have a conviction of, oh, it's probably that RSS import we did last year that we didn't like. So yeah, that was really efficient, and I couldn't have done it just by a hunch. That would have taken, I don't know when I would have found that out. So other examples is, this was the one with all the blocks rendering on all pages. Another example is you can reconfigure views. I don't know, do you guys ever look at views when you're configuring them that have that little gray bar enabled where you can see the query? Yeah, when you're configuring views, you don't actually need to be a specialist in database queries, but I'm pretty sure most of you guys look like you're all developers, so you probably know what a join and what a where statement is. But what I usually tell people if they don't is that joins are the evil ones and where is fine. And if they're configuring this thing, and even if they don't know SQL, if they then keep an eye on that gray bar, and when it gets like around 5 centimeters high, then they should start thinking about if they can do something differently. Because Views is really happy with doing left joins or joins in general, and it makes a lot of them, you probably know already. So, but some of the fun things about Views is that it's automated. So different sections of the Views configuration screen, I wish I'd taken a screenshot of it, but I haven't. I forgot that. But they create different parts of the SQL query. So for instance, some views we managed to reconfigure where there was some taxonomy terms that were put in as contextual filters up in the right corner of the Views configuration screen. This is not efficient, I hope you know what I mean. And in the bottom left corner, there are filters where you can filter by a taxonomy term, for instance. And that one creates where the other one up in the upper right corner creates join. So if it's actually just static, it's the same 3 different terms you get in, then might as well create 3 different views with a filter where it's filtered by taxonomy term or whatever it is for each. And that it was like 1.5 seconds for a query. That's a fairly long database query, and it was at 1/2 second, I think, after we had done that. Another one that has been really easy was GD. Anyone of you guys ever looked at what the different image libraries do? Okay, in Drupal 6, then you had to make a choice because neither GD or image cache was in core. So you had to download this image API module, which was lovely because it was 1 out of like 8 just to display an image, and everybody was unhappy. In D7, the wonderful thing happened that GD, which is a PHP library, became in core, so you no longer had to make that choice. The wonderful thing is that GD is really, really inefficient. It runs in PHP memory, and it runs very inefficiently in PHP memory. GD is a lot more, or ImageMagick is a lot more efficient and runs in system memory. So just switching one image library with the other, it's downloading a module and it's clicking like 2 buttons in the admin interface. We could take up off 110 megabyte of their PHP memory limit. So that's a lot just by downloading a module. Views UI also, that was also a tuning project where we took that off. We were trying to get that PHP memory limit down, and just by disabling that on production, we could put down that PHP memory limit another 80 megabyte. A very large customer had like their week of prime time ever, and they had millions and millions of visitors. And we had asked them for like 6 months that it was a really good idea to cache panels and views. And that's the stuff that sometimes a hard sell that is like, oh, it can't be that important. It's that little weird setting that's buried down in the right corner in the views, GUI under advanced, which you have to open. That's not important. But anyways, they were down and they were losing a lot of money in the middle of prime time. They were down for 1.5 hours, and just enabling caching on one panel and one view brought the site back up again. So there's a lot to be had with all this. That tuning project with switching GD with image cache, ImageMagick, etc. We ended up getting 4 times the processing power out of the same hardware. That would have meant that they would have had to buy 4 times as much hardware. So how do we figure out about this? Again, it's looking at symptoms at the site profile. On the server, we can look at database, logs, traffic, APC, memcached, etc. There's a lot of stuff to look through. What I usually do, and where I spend almost all my time, that is in New Relic. I really love this thing. Was anyone here that didn't know it? I might just do this quickly otherwise, but there are somebody that don't know it. Okay. I don't think you are. If they are being held up a little bit, it's late in the day and they can pretend they're listening and sleeping a little bit. So, anyways, New Relic is kind of awesome. Here there's a lot of secret functions because I didn't have like a generic site. So the secret functions is because, yeah, I can't show you customer stuff. It's not because it's F words or anything there. So, but New Relic here, you get just on the overview of the transactions, that's the screen I use the most. So if you don't know it, that was where I started with New Relic, because you don't need to know much in order to look at this lovely Tetris image and see that there's a lot of brown there. And then it actually has color-coded function names underneath, so you can see which function is taking up the most time on your website. So, and if you then click on one of those, then you get an overview of a breakdown, where you can see different parts of the query of what's happening when that request is processing. And you can see nice color-coded blocks with how much time that takes up. And then if you have the paid version, then there'll be these slow traces in the bottom of that page, where you can click on one of them, where there'll be recent slow traces that New Relic has recorded. And then you actually get a little bit of like XHProf for people who want it prettier. So, because this thing can do pretty much almost everything that XHProf can do. Sometimes I do go from there into XHProf, but it's really rare that it's necessary. And I don't know, my life is too short to sit and mess around with XHProf unless I really, really have to. It's geeky and it's fun and it sounds awesome, but this is just a little bit quicker. So, here you can drill down and see it makes these nice blocks on the left for you, where you can keep just clicking on the one that's fattest and then figure out where does the leak come from, why is all this happening. And just yesterday, I actually fixed my own feed implementation that I had delivered to a customer like 2 weeks ago. because my colleague has been so nice that he had enabled New Relic on that testing site that it was running on, and I could suddenly see that my feed importer took like a whooping 9 seconds, which was way better than it was before, because it used to be 40, but still. And just opening New Relic and clicking in like 2 taps, I could see that there was a database query that ran insane. And that's, if you have the paid version again, then there's a tab up here for database as well. And just by putting one index on one table, then I had a feed that was running at 2.5 seconds instead of 9. That's a really big difference in less than an hour's work. And that's my favorite thing about performance. Obviously, you know, sometimes you have to go in there and figure out what core patches have been submitted to a combination of open or organic groups and node access in Drupal 8 that is not yet backported because you have something really hairy going on. And yes, that does happen, but like 99% of the time, it's really easy things like this that's been missed. It's an index on a table, it's views caching, it's panels caching, it's 404 queries that are killing the site. It's very basic stuff, and all that is very easy to find. So, so yeah, sometimes you do have to look into it and give it, like, it gets really complicated, but often not. Where I don't like to start is, or where I get a little bit itchy when I have people who really want to, they just jump at this, and then the first thing they do is like start raping Drupal and taking everything out of Drupal control and hide coding DB queries, or just throwing hardware at it. So you have like the local hairdresser site that runs on hardware that could run eBay or something. So, and that's, you know, that's fine if they're happy paying for it, but it's just, you know, there are easier ways around it, and it doesn't have to be so scary. There are also many developers, and I used to be one of them, that wanted to rewrite Drupal because it did such stupid stuff. I think most of us has been there, at least when we started out. And at times I'm there again, but I usually don't, because I just know I'm going to lose that battle, if not now, then later. Most of you probably already know and live with that every day, that it's really good to just do things the Drupal way and try to override as little as possible. Then I've also worked with quite a few people that were like, oh no, that's too complicated, let's just write some JavaScript and get it over with and get it fixed. And that's really, really quick, and then someday you need the data that's now being computed in JavaScript, and you don't know how to get it back into the application layer, and you're kind of fucked. Then there's ESI, and that's also a wonderful solution. It does a bootstrap still to a much lower level though, but ESI is not, I think most people, they're not as in love with it now that they used to be, and you know, it's a genius solution if you need to just have like a site say hello Bob or something, but if you have 10 things on the site that you need to have personalized or custom loaded, then it's just not a good solution. Because what you then end up with is that you then have 10 bootstraps to a lower level instead of one full, and then it's just, you know, it's not quicker anymore, then it's slower because you're doing something really clever that sounds awesome and sounds like it's going to work wonderfully. So again, when you start, then it's of course really important to look at, you know, what is actually happening here. Is it the hardware we're trying to solve? Is it a particular page? Is it the database only that's just boiling over? I had a customer some months ago where I was there talking to them about performance, and they had one of these lovely databases that ran to like 95% CPU like 5 times a day, and everybody got a little bit itchy and nervous, and I understand them. So we talked about caching because they kind of had decided that they didn't use that, and they had a really big site. So, and they totally saw the point, and they were totally going to do that. The only thing was that they had listened so well, and they could just not wait to implement this. And they went back and they enabled entity cache and all kinds of, you know, block cache, views caching, whatnot. And they had kind of forgotten the first step, which was to first enable memcache or something to put all that stuff into. So when they put this live, then they had a database that was already dying just from serving the pages. And now it was starting to want to do all this caching. And then it needs to fill up its cache. So every time it was showing a page, then it was already struggling to deliver it, but now it also had to write back to itself in the same database with all the cache, or to fill up the cache. Because, yeah, when you start out, it's empty. So yeah, all this stuff with caching and a failing DB, etc., it's awesome, but the main concept of database or MySQL performance, that is that you're trying to put everything that doesn't need to go into the database to go somewhere else. Because often the place where your performance will be struggling, if you have a larger site with many visitors, for instance, that's going to be the database. So everything like statistics, search, logs, caching especially, we don't want to write that back to the database. We only want to write back to it when we have some new information that the database really needs. It doesn't need to know about logs. We can put that somewhere else, and there's analytics for statistics, etc. So yeah, both good and bad. So often I find that performance, we talk about development being like 80-20, and often I find that performance can be 99-1. You can have that site that I just told you about, where you have a massive site that's dying and you enable caching on one view and one panel, and then it's up again, and that took you like 10 minutes. But one thing I really liked, or some things that I really like to think about when I choose the approach, is to both apply effort where it will pay off for me, so I use my time efficiently and don't just spend the next 2 months rewriting the cache layer because I'm a developer and that's awesome and I write good code. I also am, but to a certain degree. But also just to remember that you need to maintain this. Whatever you put in there of custom code, that's your own. If you can use contributed modules, if you use the Drupal API even just, then it's easier for the next guy that comes in there. If you write your total own custom stuff and heaps of it, then you need to hire developers that are going to spend their time having to understand what you have done. And if you have written like thousands of lines of code and you leave the company, then it's not nice to your colleagues. They're going to be sitting there with a heap of a monster to maintain, and you're not there anymore. And then it's a little bit like, why is it that we're using an open source solution again? Because then you've pretty much written your own solution. You have the same problem as if you had built it from scratch. So one thing I also, when I think about that, I also sometimes actually ignore some performance issues, simply just because it will add so much complexity that I don't see it's worth it. Because, yeah, it's the pay for the developers, it's their time. You have to maintain it from now on going forward. You don't only have to write it. So what I like to think of is creating sustainable sites, where you're thinking a little bit about that code is evil. Because, yeah, every line you write yourself, you have to maintain, and every contributed module, somebody else will do it for you. I know that's a horrible open source developer, but yeah, that's how I work. So this is more about what I usually look at when I collect the data. Again, not super detailed. I'm not going to give you examples of load balancer logs because, well, it is too late in the day for that. So anyways, I look at the site profile just to figure out which areas should I drill into. Obviously, we are past the whole thing where I've asked the customer or whoever I'm working with or myself if I've messed up my own site. That does happen. What the issue actually is it the hardware that's, do I need the hardware the size of eBay? Is my database dying? Is it the sites that take like 5 minutes to load? What's happening? Then I look at the site profile because it's very different. Some things with performance are very different depending on what kind of site it is. If it's organic groups, if it's domain access, that's two of the big monsters that adds complexity and makes developers a little bit feeling like they've painted themselves into a corner sometimes. I've done that at least twice with big sites, I think, in the past. Well, okay. Anonymous and authenticated traffic is also really important because there's a lot of difference in caching. Most of you have probably already looked at this, but for example, external caching like Varnish, that only really works well with anonymous traffic. You can set it up to work with authenticated traffic, but it's fairly involved. So if it's mostly authenticated traffic, that means logged in users, then I'll look a lot at memcache and make sure that's just running like 100% smooth, so it looks pretty. And if it's almost only anonymous, then I'll make sure that they have perfect Varnish set up and the caching is really well there. Or that's what I would look at if it's low pages. Modules, node access is always a fun one that creates a lot of extra complexity and performance issues. Organic groups, we just talked about that. Then I look at custom code, whether there's like, okay, we have exported free features and written a little module because we didn't like the color of the corners in the Facebook plugin, or whether it's like we've actually written a whole separate Drupal that's now overriding the existing Drupal, and it's like 30,000 lines of code. And if there's a lot of custom code, I might end up in a debugger at some point. But usually I can get away with staying in New Relic like 98% of the time. I'm pretty lazy, but yeah, that's where I do most of my work. Then there's something called the Acquia Insight Report, which is actually something you can get for free to a certain degree. And if I have a site, even if it's not an Acquia one, or if it's just my own or a friend, then I sometimes create a free profile or a free site, dev site on Acquia, because, well, you can get this free account where you still have dev and stage. You won't have prod. This is because it's my employee account. But the other thing you get that's pretty neat is something called the Insight Score. This is my employee account, and if you get to 100% up here, you get a t-shirt. I am nowhere near getting dressed anytime soon. Mine is as 50. This is computed upon a lot of automated tests that Acquia does. And that's in different categories like security, best practice, SEO, and also performance, which we really like. And when you click on these little boxes here, then here there's, for instance, anonymous users have admin privileges. That's not necessarily bad for performance, but, well, if they set up weird stuff in there, it could be. If I click here, then some of these boxes will actually, not this one, but some of these would show me that it would fix it for me if I wanted to. It won't do that in the free edition, actually. There you will only get the overview, but that's sometimes enough. If you look at the list, I think I had it here, for instance, with performance, you don't really need that long explanation, and this overview here comes with the free edition. So that's a little bit of, you could say it's cheating, and just get a free check of, automated tests that are stuff that we've run into in support tickets, like, repeatedly. So, for instance, stuff like block cache being disabled, that's, yeah, you might not even know that. Or the minimum cache lifetime, or that cron has stopped running, whatnot. You would have to click around a lot. So I really like, this stuff is just telling me that. Thanks. Anyways, in application, one of the first things I look at is caching, because that's usually where there's always more to do, almost always. I just told you about that site that had, I think they have 2,000 authenticated users, and they don't believe in caching. That's a very, very difficult project. They run, I think they have they have a lot of servers. So, but okay, it does add complexity. It is a choice somehow. I would choose to use it, but still, it does add complexity. There are many caching layers in Drupal, but it really, really is efficient. It's pretty much the way to get anything to run on the interwebs today, because there's so much functionality going on. People don't have the patience, but that's more of a philosophical discussion, I think. Anyways, so you can actually run a caching report with a drush command, where you can see which views and blocks and panels are cached or not. Just so that, if you have to click through that stuff yourself, then you have to, set up off the half of the afternoon to get through it. Maximum minimum cache lifetime is something I also look at. And whether page caching is enabled at all. I look at best practices. The Acquia Insight also gives me half of these answers, thanks. But that's stuff like the statistics module. I don't know why it's even in there anymore. It's evil. Unless you only have 5 pages on your site, then it's evil. It will kill you, and kittens too. Database logging, that stuff should still not go back to the database. It just shouldn't. We don't want to be writing all kinds of stuff back to the database, especially not if we have a site that's already dying. Views, fields, rules, UI, that stuff is more like for memory limit. So that's more if your box, for instance, is running out of PHP processes. Often that stuff is memory limited. So if you, for instance, have a PHP memory limit at 128 megabyte, then you will be able to run, serve twice as many requests from that box as if you had a PHP memory limit of 256. So that's really fun to look at and get disabled in prod, and then all of a sudden you have, a massive hardware hike where it felt like a laptop you were serving your side off. Devel enabled, that can also be a little bit evil. Drupal search, I don't know why that's even there, but well, it's probably used somewhere, but yeah. Solar is there, and Drupal search gives really shitty results, sorry, excuse my French. And it's also really inefficient, and that also happens in the database. Again, the GD versus image magic, that's massively evil. GD should be forbidden or taken out of core, in my opinion, but that's not you I need to convince about that. Then there are things like use light pager, fast forward for entity cache is a huge one. It's something that you just enable, and then it goes on and caches all the entities that are for some reason not cached per default in Drupal. Nodes are cached in Drupal per default, but stuff like taxonomy terms and is menu items also on the list? I can't remember the list now. Anyways, just enabling that module, I've seen like a site suddenly serve pages 30% faster, because then you get all the stuff cached that should have been cached. And then there's, of course, the whole caching correctly, because when you start enabling all this, then you suddenly have screaming content editors and business people standing over your desk and saying, oh, I want, my article to be out there in 1 second, and it can be, or sometimes have a total reasonable request of, I want it to come out the same day, please. And then there's something not set up right in the way that you're purging and expiring cached content. But that stuff, there's also modules for it. There's expire, purge, there's views content cache. I can't even speak longer. There's views content cache that can help you clear updated and new content out of views. So there are solutions for that. Just that you don't think it can work correctly is not really an excuse for not doing it. It's totally doable, but it is a little bit involved. And again, an APM like New Relic, application performance monitor, that's where I spend the most of my time. That's where I start, that's where I end, that's what tells me where I should look. So I think Adam is gonna tell me to shut up now. But but yeah, if you're gonna do anything from what we've talked about today and you're still a little bit awake, then if you have sites where performance is important to you, or the amount of hardware is important to you, then an application monitoring service is key, I would say. There are others than New Relic, but I just really like New Relic. They should be paying me money for saying this, but yeah, I really like it. So. Well, I should be paying them money. They do have my job for me, but...
I didn't know about the difference between GD and ImageMagick, and I'm just curious, are there any caveats with ImageMagick? Otherwise, why isn't it by default?
It's just, we have this, democracy concept in the world and open source and stuff, so people, develop different libraries that do different stuff. And GD was kind of awesome in like the 80s. It could do all these wonderful like transparent overlays that went really well with back when we used Comic Sans on websites. So it really, really had its time there. Today, unless you want to use a specific module that can do something with image recognition of faces, and it's highly buggy, and I think it has like 60 downloads or something on Drupal.org, then that one relies specifically on the GD module. But unless you're one of those 60 sites, then you won't notice a difference. You can just click one off and click the other one on, and then you can like cut your PHP memory limit in half, and I don't know, buy some new shoes instead of adding another server or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really good. Do you have anything to say around module count? in terms of performance of
Yeah.
doors?
Yeah, don't go for 400, please. That's not fun. I think we usually, what's the rule of thumb? I think it's like around 150. Is that what? Come on, Chriso.
I don't trust it.
You don't trust it?
Well, some sites have 200-300 modules which are just features. So if you Josh PM list and you see something that long, yeah, you wet your pants, but then it's not that bad.
But it's still trying to call on those hooks though.
If they're enabled, and if you're loading the module page and other places that are going to be checking so much code.
It also depends on how often they're kind of touched the code that's in them, because if it's 70% of the code is touched all the time, then that will be cached all the time, and then it's just a rare occasion that you hit one of those last 30% that are probably modules that you have enabled and you forgot whether you're actually using them or not, so you don't dare turn them off again or something like that. But yeah, it's true, it's very different. It really is.
But aren't all the enabled modules they're trying to invoke them and call all the hooks, or is that being optimized? I mean, for even a feature, if it's enabled, you are trying to call all the hooks, right? Or checking if they exist.
Yeah, it's good practice to turn things off if you don't need them on. That's certainly true.
Hooks are cached as well.
Yeah, and this is hooks that are already there, so they're already being run. That hook is already being called for something else, most likely. It's more, I think it would be more of a problem if you add your own 50 custom hooks, because that's more fun and it looks more geeky than doing normal function calls. I've seen that happen actually. So yeah, I don't know. Anyone?
I would just summarize it the same way you did and say it's rarely your worst problem if you have 400 modules. It might be causing you extra pain and effort, but
I should have said, I will definitely say that next time. Yeah?
Out of interest, how much overhead does New Relic put on Drupal?
Very, very, very little. I have never seen that was the issue, or that's many years ago, that would be a consideration, but it's not anymore. You have so much other stuff going on there, and it, compared to the value you're getting from it, do we have people that turn it off because it's too heavy on the site?
Only when they insist on it, and then they lose all the diagnostic stuff and have to turn it back on and documents and all.
Yeah, yeah. So it's more of a I think that's more a discussion you start having when you're a bit like, it's not working, I want it to work, I don't know what to do, I don't have the money to hire someone else, I won't spend the money to hire someone else. It's probably that thing that's evil or something like that. So the thing that's telling me that I need to do something, it's got to be that one. Yeah. So is this why I get to say that you can go and get fresh air and fall asleep and in whatever corner you want? Or no.